Welcome to the Follow the Leaders podcast, where we get a glimpse into the minds and lives of exceptional leaders and hear about their experiences, insights, and strategies for success. On today's episode, we'll hear from one heart-centered, effective leader and hear about their wisdom and perspective. So get ready to follow along. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am so happy that you're here. This conversation is going to be so fun. I am here with another Wisconsin native to talk all things leadership and business and creativity, and I'm very, very excited for you to hear this conversation. I'm joined today by Dan Steininger. Dan is a prominent figure in the field of business leadership. He is an author, a speaker, a recovering lawyer, and a CEO. And he is a well-respected advisor dedicated to nurturing innovation in business owners and leaders. He is also known for his insightful books on innovation, and he has been a contributing columnist for the Biz Times with a column called Innovate or Die. At the helm of Steininger and Associates, he equips businesses from diverse sectors with the tools for innovative growth. His career spans leadership as a former CEO of a major financial institution, as well as active roles in prestigious organizations. As a sought-after speaker, Dan shares his wisdom with a wide array of audiences, including ours today. Dan, congrats on all of your success and your impact, and welcome to the podcast.
I'm exhausted just listening to you explain it. What was I thinking?
Yeah, I think we all ask ourselves that. I think you're in good company with this audience here. So welcome. Thank you for being here. I would love if you could just start with telling listeners about your current work. What are you up to these days? Fill us in on all of your amazing projects that you have going on.
Okay, Jamie, thanks. Basically, I want your listeners to ask themselves. I just give a short story. In my youth, every summer, I applied for a job in Glacier National Park, which we call the crown jewel of the Rocky Mountains. Hop a train out of my hometown of Milwaukee, go through Madison, of course, and on to the state of Minnesota, North Dakota, and then you come across the plains of Montana, and they're flat and they're dry, and all of a sudden, emerging out of that are the Rocky Mountains. And it's just breathtaking. It's a moment of beauty, and thinking of John Denver, if those have heard of him, Rocky Mountain High, you step out on the platform, you're smelling Rocky Mountain air. It's just wonderful. But 2 weeks after being there, I was reading Lewis and Clark's journey. When they saw those mountains, they weren't as happy because they were the barriers between getting to the Pacific. And if they hadn't found a way through those mountains, which is what mountains are, our barriers, they're our problems, our challenges. And the way you solve those is through creativity. And they happened to reach out to a woman, Sacagawea, and she grew up in that area and was able to navigate so they could get to the Columbia River and onto the Pacific. So I say to all the listeners today, if you have a problem personally, or you have challenges professionally in your line of work, or whatever you do, I'm here to give you some tips and ideas of how to solve them, how to be creative. If you don't have any problems, I would say, take the rest of the day off, go enjoy yourself, go to a bar, celebrate, whatever. But for the rest of us mortals, I'm here to give you some tips that you can immediately apply in your life. So there we go. That's the long and short of it.
I love it. So these days you are speaking, and you mentioned the mountains. You have some books out there. So can you fill us in a little bit about the work that you're doing to get these messages out there and to make an impact on the people like our listeners?
One thing you've learned, and particularly when I left the law career to become the CEO of a major company, and also ended up heading the Port of Milwaukee, which, by the way, at the time was sinking, literally. And in turning those organizations around, I realized that all of them, with all the problems and challenges they faced, I needed innovation and creativity to work my way out of it. And that's what led me to do this. So when I hopped out of corporate America, I started writing a column, Innovate or Die, because that's what businesses do every day of their lives. Jamie, of the 2 million plus podcast hosts in the world, you're one of only 13% who has survived. So you're doing something right. So I wrote a column, Business, Innovate or Die, that led to working with corporations to teach leaders at the top of an organization how to drive innovation throughout their cultures. I also teach a course on innovation at Arizona State University. So it's a joy to share with people, because creativity is something that can be taught. It's something that can be learned. Mm-hmm. And as a result, and you can't survive in life without having those skills. So I'm here to give people some tips to get over the worst challenges in the world. I'm here to help you. So stay tuned, take notes, and you'll walk away with some take-home value today. Don't waste your time. And if you don't, just turn me off.
So don't turn us off. I'm just kidding.
Sorry about that. It's your program.
Okay, well, there's so many different nuggets that we could dig into there. Yeah, I love what you said about how that is what leaders are doing, innovating. I think that is just so true. In my work as a small business owner, I also work with a ton of other small business owners. Most of my programs are collaborations with other small business owners. And I also help to support moms that are starting and growing businesses. And this is exactly the message that we all need to hear over and over throughout our career, is that we have to be willing to, like you said, innovate, to be creative. And so I'm wondering if you could just give us sort of, you mentioned that creativity can be taught. And one thing that I hear is that, like, oh, I'm not a creative person. People will say that, or I'm not creative. And I used to think that about myself too, that I was not good at quote art. So I was not creative. Well, I would never ever say that about myself anymore, because I have proven myself wrong on that over and over as my businesses have grown and evolved and new programs have developed. But I still do hear people say, well, I'm just not very creative. And so I'm curious, what do you tell somebody if they do say that to you, that they're not a very creative person? And how do you convince them that it's something that they can learn?
No, you went right to the heart of things, Jamie. I can see why you succeed. I want to ask all your listeners, including you, when your children were young, or if your parents and you have grandkids, when those little children were like 6 months old, did you have to tell them they had to play with the toys you gave them? And the next question I ask is, when they started to crawl, did you have to tell them, well, you need to start to crawl? No, they did it, right? And then the next question I ask is, then they started to try to walk. Did you say, you have to learn to walk or you're not going to eat dinner tonight? Or I'll give you a bribe, or you get some birthday cake tonight if you can walk. And then I always ask parents, what's the most complex activity you have learned in your entire lifetime? And it's all over by 5. How to speak. Mm-hmm. Did you have to threaten your children to speak? Did you have to bribe them? We are born creative. Every listener in this audience is born creative. Mm-hmm. So they say, well, Dan, what happened to us? Why? What happened? Well, I ask everyone who's listening, when you got to school, what were you rewarded for? Being creative or getting the right answer? And you weren't going to get into Madison unless you had decent grades.
Right.
And then we say, okay, now we graduated from college. You got good grades. You got a decent job. And what happens in your first job, or any job you get after college, or wherever, even if you didn't go, you're in high school, trade school, whatever you're doing. Do you tell your employer, I have a better way of doing things? Or do you say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. We're rewarded for doing what we're supposed to do, not for being creative. So the systems we have are important, but they beat creativity out of us. It's not hard to relearn what is very natural to all of you. And that's why I'm going to give you a couple tips so you can do it personally in your lives and professionally. I've had at least 5 instances in my life I almost met the Grim Reaper. I'm not going to go any of those because people think I'm crazy at this point. I had a bout of malaria when I was in the United States Peace Corps in youth in Kenya, East Africa. Nowhere in our village was there any doctors or medical care. And, if I didn't get help, malaria is a big killer. And was able to use my creativity skills to finally figure out, okay, I'll go to some mission. Maybe somebody there has something. And sure enough, it was an Italian mission. Nobody spoke any English. We did a little Swahili. I could speak Swahili. We finally figured it out, and it was a nun who figured out what I had and gave me a shot, and I'm still alive. And more recently, hiking outside of Phoenix on the eastern side, I got bitten by a rattlesnake. Oh, I mean, it's like I'm cursed. Now, what happened? In all those instances, even with the rattlesnake, I was able to communicate to get the help I needed in time that needed, and actually changed a lot of medical procedures in Phoenix. So what I share with you are things that not only are helpful to solve your problems and challenges, but may very well save your life. So these are important things to think about. So there we go. I speak from experience.
Well, I love that so much. And this conversation is getting to be a merging of so many different areas of my professional interest, because one thing that you don't know about me is that a big bulk of my work is with children still. And so, yes, I have this podcast and I work with business owners, but a big part of my work is running a creative arts enrichment program that has a summer camp that has camp opportunities for kids ages 6 to 15, and an after-school program that runs all over Madison in different schools. That's every day. And it's a multidisciplinary creative arts enrichment program. And so the conversation is right at the heart of all of these things that I believe. And I was listening to you talk about how, you said the creativity is sort of beaten out of us as we get older. And that does start even so young. Like even when you enter into the school system, so much time is taken away from creative pursuits in schools, and not to the fault of the teachers. Our teachers are working their butts off trying to do everything they possibly can. It's the system. And so that's one of the big reasons that my co-director and I work so hard to offer these kids these opportunities to be creative. And even at these really young ages, it's so interesting how quickly the kids start to say, oh, I like the art, but I don't like the yoga, or I like the music, but I don't like the drama, whatever it is. And we have to nudge them to trust themselves that they can be creative in these other specialties. And then, of course, once they try it, they find something about it, usually, that they can excel at and feel confident in. And it's not about the product that they create, it's about the process. And so it's interesting because as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about how really as business owners, we need to sort of have that same faith. We don't know if we're going to be good at these different things. We just have to trust that throughout the process of learning something new, trying something new, throwing a noodle at the wall, that our brains are going to benefit, our lives are going to benefit, we're going to feel better, and we are going to be able to achieve things that we never thought possible because we're willing to step outside of the box. And I'm curious if that's what you see too.
But Jamie, we can talk later, but I applaud what you're doing. My personal opinion that what you do should be mandatory in every curriculum and every school in the country. And very simply this, you're teaching kids rote memory, you're teaching them right answers, but they're not teaching creativity in our schools. So the kids are here's the right answer, here's how you get to it. And the little kids can memorize the most and spit it back on exams. They do very well. Where are we teaching kids the importance of creativity? And as I say, it saved my life more than once in my life if I weren't for creativity. So what you're doing is something that should be mandatory in all our education. So, but don't get me started because what you're doing is fantastic. So
this is definitely like a part 2 of the conversation, because I completely agree. And I do think it directly relates to leaders. I mean, leaders inherently are creative, even like you were saying, even if we don't recognize it. But it's willing to, I think it's something about embracing the uncertainty of like, what does this creative effort, where is this going to lead? We might not actually know, but we have to be willing to try it. And so I'm curious, you work with leaders, people that are high achievers, people that have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. How do you coax them to sort of lean into that uncertainty and try something creative?
Well, you're profound beyond your years, Jamie. The number one problem for all Americans is when we see a problem. I love a friend of mine who grew a worldwide company. Americans shoot, ready, aim. We want to jump right to the solution. The key to being creative is to, as you said, embrace uncertainty. I have a good friend who ran a major company, wrote a book, Embrace Uncertainty. It all begins to spending the time to understand a problem. Instead of trying to jump to a quick solution, spending the time to understand the problem. Take a little child. Your son comes up to me and says, Dad, can we have a monkey? And you give him an answer and they go, well, why? And then you give him another, why? So the first tip here, you've gone right, embrace uncertainty and begin by trying to understand the problem. Keep asking, as you did when you were a child, why? Why did this happen? Start listing all the causes. Sometimes it may be something you've done. I mean, you get terminated. Something happened. Well, it's everybody else's fault but mine. Look at yourself. But spend the time to understand the causes of the problem and list them all. I mean, to be really simple for the audience, let's say your car doesn't start. Okay, what are the possible causes? Well, I left my key fob in the house. Right. Then I better check the gas tank. And you go through a whole list of things to list all the possible causes. You don't jump right to solutions. So you're right. You have to suspend judgment, spend the time to really get to the cause of the problem. I'll give you one example of the value of it. True story. This was my company was a large company in a big office building. And at 5 o'clock every day, all of the various tenants would leave and everybody was jammed up at the elevators. And this went on for a long time to get down to the ground floors of the parking lot. Well, the facilities manager of this office building said, we need to build some more elevator shafts. And that, the millions to build elevator shafts. And they kept asking why. And eventually surfaced the idea that everybody was leaving at 5 o'clock. And it led to a whole different perspective. Well, maybe if we staggered the departure times of the various companies, guess what? Everybody got out of there in no time, never spent a dime on elevator costs. So the more you spend time understanding a problem.
It's so true. It is what it takes. I'm curious, when you're working with someone who, I'm a small business owner, I have a lot of autonomy over the direction of my company. Yes, of course, any change that I make, it does affect other people and other things, but it's not, I'm not in corporate America, right? Like I don't need to report to a board of directors who gets to tell me no. I wouldn't do very well. I wouldn't do very well in that setting because I like to be quick on my feet and agile and change things a lot. But I'm curious if you have somebody who, for example, a lot of my peers are nonprofit leaders. And so they want to think creatively, but they can be, this doesn't sound very nice what I'm going to say, but like bogged down in the like, well, we haven't always done it this way. And there's other people that are maybe not so ready to embrace uncertainty. And so I'm just curious, like, what advice do you have for someone who in theory wants to be creative in their work or in their solutions, their mountains, as you call them? Yeah.
And when they finish this, we finish going through our tips, they will have a process. Every challenge with every board, and this works for the board of directors. It'll work with people in management. It runs for, I've founded BizStart as a nonprofit. I've started plenty of nonprofits. You have to get everyone to think, apply these tools in the decision-making process, and it will bulletproof you from all the usual objections to change. So once you get those causes, tip number 2 is put them in order of priority. What's the biggest cause to this? What's the primary driver? In that elevator, it was because everyone was leaving at the same time. Things will emerge as the biggest cause. If you're getting your car, won't start, you realize, oh, I have no gas in the tank. That's the number one problem. So it's called a Pareto chart. It goes back to an Italian mathematician from the 16th, 17th century. You put these problems in order. And then usually you find the first cause is something you need to attack. And that's it. So with your board of whoever you're meeting with, once you understand the problem, we know the 5 whys, what are all the causes, in order, what's the biggest cause? What should we solve first? So you put that in place. And again, it's something sometimes you may be a contributing factor, and that's hard for a nonprofit organization to admit to, or any leader. I mean, I'll give you an example. Elon Musk recently bought Twitter. Even by his own admission, he overpaid grossly for that company. Steve Jobs spent, most people don't know this, better part of a year trashing his engineers privately and publicly for proposing an iPhone. I'll never be a phone company. Even great leaders don't follow these steps. If they follow the steps, you're not going to make those kind of crazy mistakes. So once you get done, tip number 2 is get those in order. Now you start what we call the brainstorming process, where we start to surface ideas to the problem of, for all of you listeners, and I know how hard this is, if something bad happens, to admit maybe I was the cause, but you need to ask yourself or friends to be honest. Sometimes you're the contributing factor, but get that out. Now you can start the ideation process. Now, here's important, and for a board of directors, and this is really helpful, because if you're a head of a nonprofit and you're trying to get a board involved and they're like, we haven't done it this way, why should we go that direction? What I suggest, and this is true of everybody, here's tip number 3. When you start the idea process, first of all, the more ideas, the better. Number 2, don't comment. You're not allowed to weigh in on them. Tip number 3 in business meetings. Half of American population are introverts. They're not like you, Julie. Okay, so Susan Crane wrote a wonderful book called Quiet. Many people don't want to speak up in meetings. So you have a brainstorming session. What happens? People are louder. We tried that before. Or we can't do that. Or that costs too much. My suggestion in your business profile, whether you're a nonprofit, profit, whoever facilitates the meeting, ask for everyone on that team. Once you state the case, you send it to the board of directors. Here's our problem. Here's what we're facing. So everyone has agreed to, here's the problems. Here's the causes. Now, we want your ideas. You put them in an email. Why in an email? Because it allows the introverts to be heard. True story, Harvard Business School. I went to law school in Boston at Boston University. I had a lot of friends at the Harvard Business School. I would go to some of their classes. They did a thing every year where you're told your plane crashed in Alaska somewhere, and you are given only a few hours to take what you need to survive. They had a list, and then they play that back to evaluate how they made decisions. And they noticed one student wasn't talking. And they finally turned and said, you didn't say anything. Well, I'm a little afraid to talk up in large groups. And they said, okay, well, what did you think of our ideas? And he said, oh, you won't last 2 days. And they said, why? Why are you talking about it? I grew up in the wilderness of Alaska. You picked all the wrong things. That's why you want to, and if you have a board of directors, you're going to hear from the introverts. You hear all of those ideas. And one other thing, when you then have the actual brainstorming session, when you've got all those ideas, now you're starting to look at them. One other thing you can do, because again, people are reluctant to speak up, I call it a 4-minute drill. Keep asking questions. Well, why did we do it this way? Why did we do it that way? What was our assumptions there? Because then people will talk up more. If you come up with a solution, well, then people are going to criticize. Keep asking good questions. So make these brainstorming sessions more productive. And this doesn't have to be in a business context. You're at home. My wife said, okay, our living room needs to be updated. We haven't done it in so long. I'm looking around, it looks great to me. Well, okay. So now we're putting all the paint samples up. It got a little crazy. Now I'm thinking, okay, this is either going to get done or we're going to get divorced. So I finally said, look, let's put our creativity tools in place. What are some alternatives than us doing this? And guess how? Well, how about an interior decorator? We found out 3 interior decorators lived within 6 blocks of us. Had them come by, chatted with them, finally retained one of them. The cost was pretty modest. Within an hour, she had solved the whole thing. And I finally asked her, do you do marriage counseling? So that's not the first time I've been asked. So again, put as many ideas in play as you can. If you put 5 in play, you might get 1. If you put 20 in play, you'll get some more. 50 in play. Post them on your refrigerator. Post them on the whiteboards at work. Keep thinking those ideas. And I'm going to ask one important question to everybody, and please write this down. Where do you get your most creative ideas? Is it at the office? Where does new ideas come to you the most often? How about you, Jamie? Where do you get your great ideas? Because you're very creative. Where do you get them?
It's funny. I usually either walking the dog or when I'm in the car or when I'm just like going about. It's actually funny. Sometimes when I'm listening to a podcast, one that I don't have to pay that close of attention to, I can let my mind wander and just something puts me in that zone. And then I have to pause everything and quick write it down. I have a note in my notes app. But
and you are a typical of the way everyone has it. Well, I was in a shower. Well, I woke up at 2 a.m. Steve Jobs was famous for going for walks. I'm a swimmer, and ideas come to me when I'm swimming. And I could write them down. At first, I would always have to go back to the office and say, could you read what I've written down? The ink is finally I learned to do it in pencil. And I'll tell you why that is. We have an executive function right now. Everyone listening, it's on high level. It comes in through your hippocampus up there, and they're all processing all this information all day long. Pictures, advertising, people, oncoming traffic. You cannot think creatively. How do you get from that left brain into the right brain? Well, when you sleep, when you're daydreaming, your mind, or at night, that thing turns off. That executive function up there turns off. That allows you creativity to emerge. And that's why you get weird dreams at night, because there's no governor on it. And another tip on how to think creatively in brainstorming is humor. Now you'd say, why humor? Well, let's go back thousands of years. And we were running around the plains of East Africa where civilization actually started. And you see someone coming at you far away with a spear or a group. Now, you can't call them. You can't text them. You can't email them. How do you know they're friendly or they're going to kill you? So our ancestors developed humorous ways of signaling, I'm friendly, and they were usually humor. To this day, humor is an important element in moving you from your left analytical brain to your right side, which is the creative side. So whether you're little kids or what, humor frees them. And the other thing about in a corporate meeting where you have, as you say, board members, whoever, humor breaks through that class distinction. There's a crew working on my street out front. I got a nice house. I walk out. You know what they're thinking. Yeah, this rich guy, what does he know? So I walk up to him and say, okay, why do you think Brett Favre threw that interception last night? What was he thinking? 2 minutes later, we're best friends. So as you think of, and you need to think about creative solutions, do humorous things. Watch YouTube clips, TikTok, whatever gets you laughing, old Seinfeld clips. I don't care. So inject those in meetings and your own personal things. So there's part of that brainstorming tip I'm giving everyone. So those are important tips on how to get to solutions. Now, you laugh easily, so I'm sure it isn't a problem, but build it into your sessions of creativity.
Well, I love that so much. And I mean, if we even take this and use the kid programs as an example for this, because I think it's so easy for us as adults to think back to like our childhood, which is why I love that you integrate these stories into what you're talking about. But even if you were to take the drama program in our creative arts, our program is called Creative Soul Club. And so if you took the drama segment of Creative Soul Club, there are some drama programs for kids out there that do much more of that sort of, they show up, they're given the script, they're given the uniforms, they're told, where to go. They have a director telling them, and they memorize and they perform a final product. And that there is so much value. There's so much to learn from that. But that is completely opposite from the way that we approach drama in our programs. It's that they get, the seed of a script or a seed of an improv, and the kids get to figure out how their character sounds and what their character's name is and what their character's going to say and where's the scene going to go together. And, our quote final product, our final presentation, the kids are usually holding the scripts, and it usually changes the day before. And it's just to let the kids have that experience of, being playful and putting their own spin on it. It really is so cool to see kids then tap into that playfulness. And it is one of the reasons why even in my teacher trainings that I do or camp counselor trainings that I do, that I really try to have the educators, the camp counselors in training, experience that playfulness themselves. It is such a connector, and it does open up that way of thinking and that feeling of collective effervescence. And so I really love the way that you describe that. And I also have to say, speaking of humor, when you were talking about welcoming all the ideas and letting everybody, even the people who don't want to speak, share their ideas, it reminded me of Ted Lasso. He says, don't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. And I love it. I'm like, all right, we're not going to bring an umbrella to this brainstorm. Everybody, all the ideas are welcome. We're not going to stop any of them.
I like that. I like that metaphor. I can see, though, if you're in school, we're going to do two plus two is four. It's very grim. We got to get the right answers, and you're corrected if you don't. You imagine what teacher is going to inject humor into a classroom when you're trying to teach rote memory. That's why what you do should be mandatory, because great creativity, the things you're going to need to survive in life, and all the problems that be thrown at you. Some can be tragedies, health problems, loss of a friend or a spouse, all the things that get thrown at you in life. Humor is an important way of unlocking the creative solutions you're going to need to recover. So you got it. I'm glad you teach it, and it needs to be encouraged. So I would highly recommend you, like I said, you should be mandatory in all the curriculums, all the primary and all the high schools throughout the country, and actually on college level as well. So,
well, someday, Dan, I'm on a mission. Someday it'll be everywhere.
All right. Tip number 4.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, to your listeners, this is really important. Now you've got 50 ideas or 20 ideas. They all look really great. Now what do? All right. This is really important, and it's rarely done. I'm going to give you a simple example. You want to get a car, and you go to every dealer. You try this car, you try this car, you try that car, and they all seem pretty good. I mean, everybody got in a car. Oh, there's a horrible car. How do you choose which car you want to buy? You step back and you create a simple matrix. In order of priority, what are you trying to achieve? Do you want the lowest cost car? Do you want the safest car? Do you want the car that's got the best gas mileage? That would lean toward electric. Create a simple list of the criteria you want to make the decision by. And number 1, give it a 5. That gets weighted number 1. Safety is number 2. That gets weighted number 4. Put those in order. Now you keep a simple list. You weight them all, and then put car A, B, C, D, and each one gets a grade based on the criteria you set up. Then you just add up the column. That's not scientific. I mean, when I do these for major corporations and manufacturing problems, they're more detailed. But you add up the column and you say, I got to get an electric car because I don't want to pay for gas anymore. So my point is, the process isn't finished till you start evaluating those ideas. And now they'll pop up, which are the most sensible ones, the most likely to fit what you're really trying to do. I mean, everybody in sales, if you've ever been in sales, and nonprofits are all in sales because they're trying to raise money. What are the donors you're seeking? What criteria are they looking for in your organization? So those are tips that your listeners should write down. Simple way of selecting which are the best ideas you should pursue.
That's really helpful. So you talk about mountains as problems, and I'm assuming that you take these strategies, these tips, and apply them to conquering the mountains. But I know you've written some books on this topic. Your books were
Moving Mountains Every Day, Conquering Your Mountains. I got a mountain obsession, and my winter home is at the base of the White Tank Mountains in Phoenix. So
I love it. That's okay. I have a light theme for all of my things, so I get it.
You got to have a metaphor that works.
That's right.
And everybody sees mountains look beautiful, but that's the good news. The bad news, they can be challenging, and it can be very overwhelming, and it can be the end of you.
All right. So Conquering Your Mountains and Moving Mountains Every Day. Can you tell us a little bit about your books and who's the right person to read your books and where can they find them?
Those are primarily directed to those in business and nonprofits as well. They're more reference books so much than you don't read them as bedtime reading. Each one is based upon columns I've written over the years and each little problem. So you have a board of directors. How do I deal with a board of directors? You go to the chapter on board of directors. Or I have a hiring problem and I don't know how to hire properly. You go to the chapter on hiring where I give creative solutions. And I give primarily stories, how others have dealt with the same kind of creative solution. So that's, for those who want to get the book, but it's for primarily people in business. And which gets me to tip number 5. And that is, now you've got the most likely thing you want to do. Take your podcast that you've been doing, or which you introduced for kids. And that seems like the most, now if it's really simple, you can implement it right away. But if you're not entirely sure, that gets a green light. But some things take more testing. So what we do is you test it. You try to test your idea to see if it works. I'm sure when you started a podcast, you didn't have immediate success. You had some failures along the way. You kept testing to see what formula is going to work and get me an audience. So you test it. So you put gas in your car and it still doesn't start. You got another problem. So it's very simple. You test those things and you go through it. And as a result, you find out what works. And you have to recognize that not every experiment's going to work. Was Thomas Edison. They asked him, how do you feel by 1,000 filaments? All those failures. I never had a failure. I had 1,000 experiments. And then when you got the best idea, don't hesitate to test it on others to see what they say. And the military creates what they call murder teams, literally create a group of people to attack the idea. And that can contact in a business. What's wrong with my idea? What did we do wrong? One real quick trip, and I will caution all your audience, this is something we've all been on. Early in my career, when I switched from being a lawyer to CEO, I was absorbing everything about business. So I attended a conference a speech held by Professor George Harvey of George Washington University. Professor Harvey has actually written a book called The Trip to Abilene. So he was visiting his wife's house in the Panhandle of Texas. About 4 p.m, it was 104 in the shade. They were on the front porch. He said we had a swamp cooler going, which is a fan through wet hay. And Granddad finally said, does anyone want to go to Abilene for dinner? Now, Abilene was like 30, 40 miles away from Code, Texas. And Harvey said, I turned to my wife and said, well, honey, do you want to go? And she said, well, what do you want to do? And I knew that, well, I mean, she wants to go and grandma's tying her shoes. So they all end up going in the old Granddad's Packard, across the Panhandle of Texas. It's dusty, it's blowing. They didn't have air conditioning. They ended up at a Greasy Spoon Cafe in Abilene, having a kind of a miserable dinner, pack back in the Hadley, cross the Panhandle, get to the front porch at 8 o'clock at night. And they were so miserable for an hour, nobody could even say a word. Finally, someone said, whose idea was it to go to Abilene? And so, well, Granddad said, it wasn't my idea. I was just throwing things out. I didn't say we should go. And then Jerry turned to his wife. She said, Jerry said, I thought you wanted to go. Oh, no, honey, I thought you wanted to go. And then Grandma started crying. So they spent the next several hours. How did a group of people go to Abilene when no one wanted to go? And so fast forward to the Watergate proceeding many, many years later, a senator from my law school, Washington University, Sam Irwin, was questioning Charles Colson, who was one of the break-in guys, and asked him, Mr. Colson, at any time prior to the break-in of the Democratic headquarters, did anyone say, maybe this is a dumb idea? And he said, no. What if they would have? We wouldn't have done it. And that brought down the president of the United States. So the point I'm making is find ways of finding out maybe your greatest idea isn't the best, but ways of testing it. So just to protect yourself from your trip to Abilene. So there you go. Follow those rules, and I guarantee you're going to make some much more creative solutions. Not that you can solve everything in life. And then I have 2 personal tips I want to leave everybody with before we tune out.
Yeah.
And that's away from business decisions or anything. I want to give a couple other tips on creativity if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just 2 things to build into your day. All of us, every American who's listening, who turns into this, build solitude into every day. A time you're not checking your cell phone, a time you're not checking text.
That's hard.
Because when you have solitude, your executive function, your brain turns off, ideas start to come to you. If it's when you go for a walk or you take a shower, whatever it is, build that. Be curious about everything in life. You're going to take a trip, study the country you're going to. I mean, Google anything you want, any question you have, Google it. Really creative people are people who are curious, just like you were when you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
Your kid was always doing something like running in the street or doing things they shouldn't have. And that's because they were curious. Come back to that natural element to you, which you do in your classes. And then lastly, again, humor is important to build it in deliberately to your lives because the laughing brain comes up with more creative ideas. So there you go. Again, if they want more details, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Dan Steininger, Steininger. Send me a note. We can talk. But in the meantime, you and I need to chat about making you mandatory in every school in the country. Anyone who would say no, I say, well, good. You're condemning these little children to a fate worse than death. Go ahead.
I'm gonna send you in for the sales pitch. That's great.
Your budget, and I can testify, having 5 close calls with the Grim Reaper, how creativity has saved my life. So these little children might even die if you don't allow Jamie to come in and chat with them. So listen to Jamie or die.
Yeah, innovate.
Yeah, it could be innovate or die. Yeah, retain Jamie or die.
There you go.
That's what we call Gale's humor. Oh, by the way, for your listeners too, if you reach out to me, I do a bi-monthly newsletter, creativity tips. It won't cost you anything, but you can go to LinkedIn and just sign up. Go to Dan Steininger and sign up. The latest one I went was this wonderful woman over 50, got to within 133 feet of the top of Mount Everest at 51 years old and stopped and turned around. And I said, would you have the strength and character to turn around that 133 feet from your goal of top of Mount Everest? It's well worth reading. Right? We all read about the success stories. We don't read about when we've said no to a goal. Anyhow, you get that newsletter free. And so sign up and you'll get it twice a month. And be all the tips to how to lead a more creative life.
Well, wonderful. I will definitely be subscribing. We will put a link to that in the show notes. Dan, before we go, there's a question that I ask everybody at the end of every episode. And that is, if you had a day off, completely off, where you could accomplish nothing, you could write no books, you could write no innovate or die columns, you could accomplish no tasks, what is one thing that you would do, one activity you would do that day, and one place you'd go to get something to eat?
Okay. Well, as to what I would do, and to your listeners, you should be doing that every day of your life, building something into every day of your life where you do something good for yourself. I had a shrink tell me that when I was the CEO of a company, buddy, you're going to burn yourself out and end up in an early grave. Do something good for your everyday of your life. For me, primarily, I'm a swimmer. I'm very close to Lake Michigan. So here I hopped on 2 minutes away from Lake Michigan. And when it's cold, I wetsuit up and I swim. I'm out in Phoenix. We got heated pools. So swimming is what I do every day because I don't need to do something different, but already. And so that's number one. And where would I eat? Well, I got a wonderful backyard grill, and there's nothing more beautiful environment. Grill something and sit out and enjoy the birds and the flowers. So.
Well, I love it. And usually I have to encourage my guests to make time for that. But just somehow I think you probably already do make time for this kind of thing on a regular basis. So
exactly. Build it into every day. What are you going to do good for yourself today?
Well, Dan, thank you so much for being here and sharing so much wisdom with our listeners. We will link everything in the show notes. You also have a website. We'll link that. Is there anything else that you want to leave listeners with today? Any way to reach out to you or anything like that? I know you shared so many ways that they could reach out, but am I missing anything?
All of us heard of people with post-traumatic stress syndrome, and you lose a loved one. You've been in war and combat. But folks, we all know we're going to go through some hard stuff. And by the way, we're not going to live forever. What I shared to people, I know as many people, and all of us too, who have post-traumatic growth. You apply what I've shared with you today. You can go on and survive some of the worst tragedies in life. I know someone who's a great speaker. He became paralyzed his senior year of high school in a water skiing accident. He went on to become a famous speaker, winning Special Olympics gold medals. There's always the possibility of post-traumatic growth. And that is something all of us as human beings need to do because life is short and you want to get through it as best you can. So when tragedy strikes, what I've shared with you is something that will help you through some of the worst of things. So, all righty. But thank you for having me, Jamie. I can see why you succeeded.
Well, thank you. And likewise, and to all the listeners, thank you for listening. We'll be back next time with another inspiring interview. Follow the Leaders is produced by Lit Path Studios and music is by Shane Ivers. You can hear more about this show and all the other podcasts at Lit Path Studios by going to www.litpathstudios.com.